The VC Project.
Okay, here we are. It's our first podcast. I see you smiling.
What a feeling.
We've been talking about doing this for a while. So, Pat, for people who don't know you, tell me your name.
Pat Venditte. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. Been here in Peoria, Illinois for 5 years and working with you for almost 3, a little over 2.5.
Can't believe it's been that long. And for people who don't know me, my name is Jeremy Caldera, and we both work at Pearl Technology. And I've got a long history and background in AV. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute. But yeah, so this was your idea. You wanted to do a podcast. Tell me why.
You know what? I thought with the ins and outs of our day, good and bad. Luckily, I work with somebody that can handle a little firmness, both coming from me and coming back from you. I thought, maybe people would like to know a little bit more about the AV industry and specifically, kind of the ins and outs of what all that deals with, because as of a little over 2 years ago, I had no idea. So I wanted to start something to where somebody who maybe was switching careers at a point in their life where they didn't expect to be switching careers. Now, I played baseball before this, so I fully knew at some point.
We'll get more into that. We're definitely going to get more into that. Right?
I was going to have to pivot careers.
Yeah.
You just don't know when. So for me, 38, new career, I felt like people could really benefit from this and get a different perspective.
So for people who don't understand the dynamic that you and I have, the interesting thing is, so I'm executive vice president and oversee all AV systems design for Pearl Technology. Now, Pearl Technology as a whole does data center, cybersecurity, managed services, all that stuff, right? But as far as AV goes, which is what we're talking about primarily, I handle a lot of the design work and kind of assist you in some regards when it comes to the sales. So you're more of an account manager sales guy, right? So you're coming into the AV industry cold, right? With your only experience of AV being what you do in your living room or you have at your house or what you see when you were at the ballpark, right?
Freezing cold,
right? So, and then my experience with AV over 20 years is in the nitty gritty of the AV, right? Doing design, installation, management, all that kind of stuff, right? So it's an interesting dynamic that you and I have, which I think makes for, good conversation, good podcast, and, good or bad for us in general, and a lot of times I think people have told us we need to go to couples therapy. The wives too.
That's why we're here.
Maybe this is our couples therapy. This is our couples therapy, right? So we can always hash out our stuff, but it's always good. So it's an interesting dynamic because it's always the engineer versus the sales guy, right? I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that can relate to that dynamic and that relationship. So
without a doubt, and although you are an engineer, you are a fantastic salesman, which has helped somebody like me with limited sales experience as I've transitioned these last couple of years.
I've been fortunate enough that I spent the good part of my early career, say about 8 or 9 years actually in sales engineering, right? So it was dedicated specifically to sales, right? Along with doing the designs and stuff myself, smaller firm that you kind of had to do both, right? So I benefited a lot from that. And I think I can bring a lot of that experience because when I did that, it was my early 20s, right? So I'm fresh out of college trying to learn how to sell. My only sales job I ever had was working in the plumbing department at Menards, right? Maybe a little bit at Sears over a summer, right? And then I dabbled in radio as a top 40 radio DJ for years, right? So it's very limited sales experience. So I kind of like you hit the ground running, but doing it at a much different age, much younger, much more naive, right?
And that's where your engineering experience comes in, because I'll come in and say, hey, why can't we just sell this at this price? It's going to get the project done, and you reel me back in.
Yeah, so it's good. So so that's a little bit of my background. When I morphed through the AV industry, if you will, I took on more of a design role, moving out of sales, and got more into project management, a little bit of site installation, things like that. Director of engineering, and then moved up to take over my own company as CEO, and then ultimately we merged and became a part of Pearl. So, this is a long history there of over 20 years of work in AV, and we can get into the weirdness of all the other stuff that came in between all that. But you have a much more interesting story, right? So you're just recently into technology sales as a whole, but tell us a little bit about your background in general, because it's not like mine. I went to college for AV, right? I majored at Columbia College in acoustics and audio video. Went up through the ranks from my early 20s up to where we are now, but you are not the same story, right?
No, a little bit different. I went to Creighton University. I majored in business. However, I would
See, I didn't know that about you.
I did major in business, but I was mainly
Never asked you
focused
that.
on baseball. I played baseball with my life's goal of continuing that as my career, and I was able to do that for a little over 12 years after graduating college. 7 of which, the first 7 were all in the minor leagues, and then the last 5.5 up and down between AAA and the major leagues with stops in Mexico, the Dominican Republic, Italy, Venezuela.
Some of the stories you've told me are completely crazy, right? When you start looking at these international teams, but
anywhere that would pay me to play, I
Yeah.
was going there. The
Right.
dollar amount didn't matter, whatever we had to do to make ends meet. But fast forward to a few years ago, had the opportunity to come aboard at Pearl. The baseball calls for the first time were not coming around spring training time. So I had this sales opportunity. And when I started out at Pearl,
But hold on, don't get too far into that, because I want to just stress on one point that I know you're humble and you're embarrassed about, right? But what is the unique part about you when it comes to Major League Baseball?
Fair enough. So all pitchers pretty much in Major League history have been one-handed, either right or left. Jim Abbott being a one-handed pitcher, he didn't have another arm.
Unlike batters that can be switch hands when they bat.
Correct.
Right.
I was a switch pitcher,
Right.
so
And there's not a lot of those.
No, there's really I was the only one in the modern era who used it game to game. There was a guy who did it once, but I used it as an advantage in my career. And yeah, that was the
And
only
now you
one.
get the bragging rights of having a rule in Major League Baseball named after you. Right?
Yes, there is a rule which dictates which way the pitcher has to face the batter. But since I last threw my pitch in 2020, that hasn't been brought up again.
It hasn't. So the Venditte rule was not executed since then. But you said there's someone coming up now, right? That's possibly doing it again.
Yeah, there's an 18-year-old kid over at Mississippi State that's incredible. So I'm guessing they're going to have to wipe up that rule book again at some point. But so I started at Pearl in 2021. In the first almost year of my time there, I sold all 4 lines, or I was basically that first year learning about the sales portion and the different lines of business, which are 2 data centers, managed services, and cybersecurity, in addition to AV. And I was really gravitating towards that AV line. In late January of 22, I moved into the AV role full time, where it was just purely my focus to work on AV sales.
It was actually a year, huh? Almost before you moved into AV full time.
Yeah, nearly. But
I guess we had some other salespeople at the time that were focused on AV as well. And when some of those things shifted, you kind of stepped up into that role. But I guess I didn't realize it was a full year. So
yeah, and then fast forward from June or January that year to June is when I kind of took over all of the AV sales for Pearl.
Now, I would argue, and our great leader Anthony and I joke around a lot that AV is definitely the cooler and coolest of all 4 of our divisions of the company. I would hope you would agree with that, since you gravitated to the sales on that side.
Without a doubt. I mean, look at all the gear we have here.
Yeah.
Come on.
We have a lot of really cool stuff here, and we've got some interesting equipment, interesting fun projects that we're always working on. I think as we develop this podcast further, we're going to talk a lot more about that stuff, right? So, I think kind of talking about, why we're doing a podcast. I know you had the idea, you explained that to us earlier, right? But, what do you see yourself getting out of this podcast? What do you see any of our viewers or listeners getting out of this podcast?
The AV industry is morphing constantly. It's a very fast-paced industry with things always changing. So for me, it's going to be learning about new products alongside with you and sharing that information with the listeners. At the same time, having a lot of fun with it, because the ins and outs of our day, there's a lot of back and forth. They can get boring, but at the end of the day, we deal with a line of business that's always evolving.
Yeah.
And I think if we can share some of those experiences with the listeners, in addition to our unique aspects of life, me just coming into the industry, changing careers in my mid-30s, with your over 2 decades of experience, it tailors to a lot of different types of listeners.
Yeah, I think I agree. I like the idea. When you first brought this up to me, I jumped on it because it's something I had been considering for quite a long time, right? I'm on a lot of other people's podcasts, but I always thought to myself, okay, when I do that, they send me a itinerary, what we're going to discuss, what we're going to talk about, do a little bit of research on it, right? Get to offer my opinions and 2 cents. But I've always thought to myself, man, it'd be kind of cool to do it myself, right? But I never really wanted to do it by myself, if you will, right? Like I said, I worked in radio for years, and it's taxing and it's exhausting. preparing for your own show. Podcast is almost the same thing, right? So when you brought me the idea and I was like, oh, great, we got somebody that wants to do this as well. I think that this would be great. And we definitely could have some fun with this. And it's not going to be a boring, lecture, if you will, right? Another, in my career as well, throughout my career in AV, I did some teaching at higher education, teaching at Columbia. And I also teach for Infocom at the 3-day shows and stuff too. And it's very drastically different when you're up in front of a crowd of college kids who know nothing, or even industry professionals who've been in the business longer than I have, and you're trying to instruct them and teach them and talk to them and things like that. And it's difficult to do solo. So I when I get to do it at Infocom, I get to do it with Chuck, who will be a guest on our show soon. I'll get to do it with other individuals, and it's fun because it's a good banter, work off each other. But man, it's exhausting doing it by yourself. So I'm excited that you wanted to do it. I thought immediately we're going to have fun doing this. It's going to be casual. It is not going to be formal in any way.
Right.
Right. But I also wanted to make it somewhat informational, right? So as much as we can have fun, we can talk about what the podcast is going to be. We'll tease a little bit about what next week's going to be probably as well. But, just sitting down and just picking some 10,000 foot level topics of what the various podcasts we can do are going to talk about. I thought to myself, we could do so much with this, right? But there's a lot that I want to do, which is kind of educational, right? Because we get a lot of clients that are always talking to us about, hey, why do you, how do I know how big of a display do I need at the front of the room? Or why do you have these certain types of speakers or microphones? And there's a lot of really common questions that people just don't understand the why behind it, right? And I don't want to get too technical with it because you can go down rabbit holes that are really deep, right? When you start to get around the design aspect. But, just the general information to a lot of our customers about, why it is we're doing what we're doing, or why we're selecting the products that we're selecting to make an experience better for someone, right? Because it's not just about throwing gear into a room. It really is about standardizing and about making experiences across the board way better, right? And we can do that, talk about that all day long as a team, you and I as the salesperson and the engineer and the designer. But in all reality, it comes down to the execution, right? And that's where our teams, I think, that support us come in and are most important, more than anything else, right?
They make everything happen. And people come to us all the time looking for ideas. Hey, I have this space. What can we do with it? And we've done so many cool projects, not only in the Peoria, Central Illinois area, but across the country that I'm excited to share with people to kind of give a more in-depth view of what it is that Pearl Technology does. And to your point, the nuts and bolts of that is our people. It's our team. It's our project managers, our technicians, all the way down to purchasing. It's a complete team effort. And that really highlights the importance of what we do.
So let's talk about the team a little bit, right? So I think at some point in the future, we're going to have our ops director on. We'll have him as a guest, right? We can talk a little bit about that. And he will bore all of us. It's fine. We understand it. It's Joe. Maybe we'll even have Jerry on. She can talk about procurement and purchasing.
She will not bore us.
She will entertain us, right? But my plan is to have other people from the industry on, other people who have podcasts, some other integrators. I know that I kind of want to do like a little bit of an integrator roundup, get some different integrators in. Fortunately, with my time serving in the leadership at Avix, I got to meet a lot of really great integrators around the world. So I'd like to bring some of them on, some educators in the industry like Chuck and some others. I think that's going to be good to kind of, teach things, learn things, why we do this, why we do that. But again, the team that we have, not just at Pearl, but any integrator has, is who's going to make things run smooth, work smooth, is going to make those experiences we're talking about so great, right? So, I will say one of the topics I wanted to talk about today, because it seems to be an important topic that I've been harping about and giving presentations on around the country, is employee retention and employee, just finding employees in general, right? I think before the pandemic, we had a lot of issues finding skilled labor. And it wasn't so much in the operations side, like the technicians or project managers and things of that nature. It was more, the people who have been in the business for a while, who wanted to design, who wanted to do sales, who understand technical sales. But, with the pandemic, that kind of morphed, I think, a little bit into every role at the company, right? From purchasing agents through accountants to technicians to everybody else, right? And so, with the transition from our old company into Pearl when we merged, right, that always comes with some pain points, right? Because you get some people transition out, or they don't like the new way of working or new policies, and that kind of stuff just is going to happen. But I think we had a really good team across the board that transitioned and that remained. And a lot of them have moved on, and some of them just because they took on new roles. Right, we had some that went to work for a client. Thank you very much, client XYZ, for stealing my good guys. We got some that worked for other integrators just because they wanted to move. Right. We had some guys that moved out of state. We didn't have a full-time presence there, so we, gave them a glowing letter of recommendation. So we, for various reasons, people leave. Right. So the idea becomes, how do you prevent the people from leaving? That are staying local, right, and that are the good team that you want to build, because it is an investment for the company and for us to invest our time and invest resources and dollars to, train people to get the CTS certifications and the manufacturer certifications. It is a major investment to do all of that, so we want to retain those employees and we want to do things to keep them, right? At the same time, we want to attract employees, right? And it's more than just salary and benefits. I think it's culture. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, you want to be proud of the work you're doing. And, coming from an industry where people wouldn't leave on their own, there was only a finite number of spots. People wanted to stay there, and the only time you were leaving is if you were fired. And now I've transitioned into an industry where people have choices. There's other integrators they can work for. And once you start to do good work, other people take notice of that. And then you have really the pick of where you want to work. So it's extremely important to keep those A team members, players around, because once that project is sold, the interaction that I have with the customer is very limited. Their then view of Pearl technology as a whole is completely based on that installation experience that they have.
It's the operations team, right?
That's it. And that repeat business is so much easier to come by, obviously, than finding new customers.
It's service after the fact too, right? The service department plays a vital role, especially when you turn systems over. And the service department plays a vital role for repeat business for you as a salesperson, right? So, we definitely want to try and figure out how to retain and keep all the employees that we're going to invest in. And I think there's just various ways to do that. And I don't think there's any kind of, magic wand that can, you can use and everybody's going to stay, right? Because everybody's got their own thing kind of going on and their own thing happen in their own personal lives. But, I like to think that we're trying to build a great culture, at least at our organization, right? And it's been challenging, and I'll be the first to admit it's changed quite a bit. There's quite a bit of change in the dynamic between the previous company and then going into Pearl, which is a larger corporation, right? And how things manage. It was a lot more loose back then. It's a little bit tighter when it comes to operational procedural things at Pearl, which are all good. I mean, I welcomed the change very much. Some others didn't. They had a problem with that, right? So it's a matter of just trying to find that middle ground, I think, where people understand the importance of process, procedure, and what comes with that, right? And not just from the organizational standpoint. I'm talking about when it comes to our projects and our jobs, right? How many times have you and I done a job together? We've had a problem that's popped up because no one followed the correct procedure on checking a display when it came in, and it was cracked and damaged, and no one found out till we got to the job site. And sometimes that's a bad look, and you want to try and avoid those bad looks with clients.
Yeah, unfortunately, we've had few instances of that, and that's gotten a lot better over the last year. What I've noticed is it starts with who your boss is. The people are going to be happier if they're working for a boss that they know is going to get in there, get his hands dirty. He's going to be the first guy in, the last guy to leave. And it's a lot easier to work for someone like that. And I think that's been one of the keys to our success the last couple of years, is having project managers and leaders on our side that are in there doing the work.
Yeah, and I mean, that's not to say that we haven't had our fair share of those who weren't in there doing the work, right? Or, every organization has individuals who do the opposite of what you're hoping, right? And so all you can do is try to mentor them to improve them, or in our previous case, they moved on, right? Yeah. And so we ended up finding someone new who was absolutely fantastic and who is completely done a 180 on our culture across the board for AV, right? And I'm proud to say, in not a bragging way, but we have quadrupled the size of the audiovisual department at Pearl just in 2 years, right? Which is huge, right? And unfortunately, there's a lot of growing pains that come with that too, because the bigger you are, the more process and procedure you need. And if you don't have it in place correctly, it's got to adapt, it's got to change. And so there's a lot of that goes there. So the team understanding the pains that come with that and getting the team to contribute and buy into, right, the changes that you want to make and let them have a voice in how they think things should work, I think is critical, because they need to really adopt what we're putting into place. It can't just be me from the leadership point pushing down a policy and procedure, which in the past we've almost kind of had to do in some regards, but now we can't because of how large we are. You really need to get the buy-in from the team, right, and get their contribution, at least in my opinion, because otherwise, like I said, they're not going to adopt it, and if they don't adopt it, then it's never going to go anywhere. It's a waste of time and effort.
These jumps have come from the ground up. It started with our technicians, project leads. That's where the true growth happens because of what we've said about, the on-site delivery. If that's there, the rest follows.
Well, it's not just that. It's even what software do we use, right? What software is going to make the operations team more efficient and more accurate and quicker in the field, right? One of the key things that I always like to say is I want a system to be so well documented and the procedure to be so on point that we can be much more efficient when we're on a job site doing the physical installation, right? Because there's a lot of times, I remember in years past when we didn't have this, not necessarily here, but I'm talking like 10, 15 years ago. If you go to a job site and you have zero organization or very little organization, the amount of time you're spending on site to install a conference room or a training room or whatever, a classroom, whatever it is can be twice as long as if you have your stuff together, right? So the earlier in the process you can give the information to the technicians, you can lay out drawings, you can get a project manager getting site pictures and finding the issues that might pop up. It's going to not only enhance the experience of the client, but our team as well. And it's going to speed up our on-site time, right? Which means now, think about this week, for example, we're doing a very large banquet center and ballroom, right? Like as we speak, they're closing that out, right? We were able to accomplish that in 5 working days. So between a Monday through Friday, you are able to bring the room down, which is sellable to the client, right? They sell that space. So their income is relying on that space being functional. And especially if it's a big banquet facility where they have events on Fridays and Saturdays and all day, having their room down loses them money, right? So the faster, more efficient we can be on our end, the quicker they can be up and running. And that applies to every vertical, right, that we're going to do business with. So I think a lot of that process and procedure is going to be, key for speeding that up. And that's what's going to set us apart, I think, at Pearl.
It's critical in the industry. And like you said, when clients' dollars are at stake, which is their time, it's even more critical.
Right. Yeah. Well, I know we talked a lot about stuff here today. We're kind of all over the board, right? I think a lot of what we wanted to do is just introduce ourselves to the podcast world. Say, hey, we're going to be doing this. We're going to be doing some educational stuff coming up. We're going to be doing some fun stuff coming up. We're not going to be very long-winded on a lot of these things. We're not going to go hours for sure. So we got to rein in some of our guests that are going to be coming in, I'm sure.
Short and sweet.
But I will say that, the plan is we got it set up for some industry leaders, some industry educators. We've got some of our clients teed up that will be, guests with us.
Vendors, brands.
Vendors and brand recognition. We're going to do a lot of that throughout the next couple of weeks and throughout the course of this podcast. And I think that the listeners will hopefully enjoy it. They'll get a little bit out of it. They'll learn a little bit as we kind of proceed and progress here. Maybe our studios will advance and we won't be in the living room here, right? But I think it'll be good. Our tools are good. We've got the tools set up. That's what we do, right? We build podcast studios and things. So I figured, why not, right?
Yeah,
let's do that here. So
there's so many brands for people to choose from, and I'm excited to have some of those different brands in here just to kind of highlight who it is that we offer, what it is that we offer. It's just going to be a fun.
Well, it's educational for you being new to the AV industry, right? Because a lot of times you'll come to me and why can't we use this one versus this one? Or, I love you, but you fall into the traps of when you get a rep coming in and showing you the latest and greatest. Hey, I want to use this. I want to sell this, right? And not necessarily understand the why behind it as to why we won't use that or why we will use that or why
lights up. I'm in.
I know that we had a lot of new tech that's cool. some of the segments and things we'll talk about is some of the new cool tech that we see throughout the week when we're doing this. So, well, next week we'll probably touch a little bit on some Christmas stuff. Christmas coming up right around the corner. So I'm going to task you with doing a little bit of research on what's some cool technology that you might want to give your kids, because they're going to be at that age where they're going to start wanting more technical stuff and more games and toys. And
we're going to call it the holiday gift guide.
The holiday gift guide. That won't be 100% of what the podcast is next week, but we'll touch a little bit on that next week. And I guess I just want to say thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. And, this is episode 1. Like I said, the Jar Jar Binks of podcasts.
You had to explain that to me. I'm not a nerd.
That's all right. You're going to have to explain some stuff to me next week when it comes to Christmas stuff. Believe me. So thanks again. Appreciate it. And thanks for tuning in.